Sophie was 23 years old when she was put up for sale. Not literally, of course, although London society still maintained a semblance of propriety as she stood in the small drawing room of Lord Kingsley's mansion, surrounded by a dozen gentlemen scrutinizing her. This difference seemed insignificant. Debt auction, that's what it was called in the documents signed by her late father. An elegant phrase for a dirty business. Creditors were given the right to dispose of the debtor's property at their discretion. And when there was no property left, only a tarnished name and a daughter, they disposed of those. Sophia stood at the window, straightening her back and lifting her chin, trying not to think about how much her hands were shaking. The dress she was wearing was the last decent one she had left. It was a deep burgundy color with a simple cut, high waist, and long sleeves. She wore no jewelry except for a simple cameo around her neck. It was the only piece of jewelry she had managed to save from the family collection. Behind her, the men were talking quietly. She didn't turn around, but she heard every word. Yes, the Hartley family, a sad story. The father lost everything at cards and then shot himself. Cowardly, if you ask me. They say he owed more than $30,000, an incredible amount. And what about the girl? No suitors. Her reputation has been tarnished by her connection to her suicidal father. Who would even agree to take her on? Someone will. She comes from a good family. She's well-bred and she's not bad-looking. There will be a gentleman who wants a prestigious name, not money. Sophia clenched her teeth so hard that her jaw ached. They were talking about her as if she were a horse at a fair. They assessed her merits and shortcomings and estimated her value. The living room door opened to let in another visitor. Sophia did not turn around, but she could feel the atmosphere in the room changing. The conversations died down. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else stood up straight. "Your lordship," said Lord Kingsley, her father's chief creditor. "What an unexpected honor. We did not expect to see you. I suppose that is why I am here," replied the new guest. His voice was deep with a slight croak. It sounded calm, almost bored, but there was a sense of authority in it, the absolute confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed without question. Sophia turned around after all. Standing at the door was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 30s, wearing an impeccable black frock coat and gray trousers. He had the bearing of a military man. His dark brown hair was cut short, and he wore an expression of cold politeness. His dark brown, almost black, eyes looked at the assembled crowd with slight contempt. Duke Edmund Raywood. Sophia recognized him from portraits in the newspapers. He was one of the richest men in England, the owner of half the coal mines in the north, vast estates and merchant ships. He was a man spoken of with awe and fear. He was ruthless in business, cold in his dealings, and unapproachable in his personal life. What was he doing at the auction of the impoverished family's debts? His gaze swept over those present and stopped on Sophia. For a few seconds, he studied her silently. She forced herself not to look away. She would not hide. She would not show fear. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, either in a smirk or in approval. "Lady Sophia Hartley, I presume?" he asked, addressing her directly and ignoring the others. "Yes, your lordship," she replied, curtsying. "I have been told you are beautiful." He slowly walked around her as if assessing his purchase. They spoke the truth, though that is not the main thing, is it? Sophia clenched her fists in the folds of her skirt, but her voice remained steady. "If you think otherwise, your lordship, I may disappoint you." He stopped in front of her, raising an eyebrow. "And how so?" "I have a nasty temper and a sharp tongue. I am completely incapable of keeping quiet when I should." The room fell completely silent. Lord Kingsley gasped in indignation. "Lady Sophia, how dare you?" But the Duke raised his hand, stopping him. An expression of genuine interest appeared on his face. "Honesty," he said, "a rare quality these days." He turned to Lord Kingsley. "How much?" "I beg your pardon, your lordship. How much did the late Lord Hartley owe?" £32,000, plus interest, of course, your grace." "35,000, the Duke said sharply. "I will cover all the debts in exchange for marriage to Lady Sophia." The room exploded with stunned whispers. Sophia felt the ground slip away beneath her feet. £35,000, a fortune. He had just bought her for that amount. Lord Kingsley rubbed his hands together, his eyes gleaming with greed. Your Grace, that is more than generous. Of course we agree. Lady Sophia, did you hear that? The Duke is proposing to you. Sophia looked at the Duke, trying to read his inscrutable face. Why? Why would he want that? He had money, power, and influence. He could have chosen any bride in England, a wealthy heiress, the daughter of a duke, or a beautiful woman with connections and a good reputation. Why would he want the impoverished daughter of a suicide? I need to think about it, she managed to say. The Duke's eyebrows shot up. Think about it? You're at a debt auction, milady. You don't have much choice. Nevertheless, I would like to understand the reasons behind your proposal before I agree to it. He smiled coldly without a hint of amusement. Reasonable. Very well. You have until tomorrow to think about it. I expect an answer by noon. He turned towards the door but paused at the threshold. By the way, Lady Sophia, if you refuse, Lord Kingsley will transfer your guardianship to the next person on the list. Sir Barton Gilmore, I believe, a widower of 50 with a reputation for mistreating his servants. I believe it is Sir Barton Gilmore, a 50-year-old widower with a reputation for mistreating his servants. The choice is yours. He left, leaving behind a deathly silence. After dark, Sophia returned to her rented room above a furrier's shop on Shipside. The room was tiny, with a low ceiling, peeling wallpaper, and a single window overlooking the courtyard. A bed, a table, a single chair, and a cracked mirror were all she owned. How far she had fallen in 3 months. 3 months ago, she had still been living in a mansion on Berkeley Square. She had had maids, a wardrobe full of dresses, and invitations to balls and receptions. She was Lady Sophia Hartley, the daughter of Lord Hartley, and a desirable match for many gentlemen. Then, in one night at cards, her father lost everything. His house, his money, his land. He spent everything on attempts to win back his losses. One morning, he was found dead in his study with a bullet wound to his head. Society turned away instantly. The invitations stopped coming. Friends stopped acknowledging her in the street. Creditors kicked her out of the house, leaving her with only a single suitcase of belongings. Sophia sat on the bed and looked at her reflection in the dim mirror. Her face was gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes, and her hair tied back in a simple knot. She had lost weight and her hands were rough from washing her own clothes. But her eyes were still the same green, with golden sparks. Stubborn. Duke Raywood offered her a way out, marriage to him in exchange for the repayment of her debts and salvation from poverty and the repulsive Sir Barton. But at what price? She wasn't deluding herself. The Duke hadn't fallen in love with her at first sight. He had a reason for this marriage. A practical, cold, and calculating one. She needed to find out what it was before she agreed to it. Sophia stood up and went to the window. The streetlights were coming on, and she could hear the voices of workers returning from the factories. This was the familiar evening scene in London, a part of which she never thought she would become. She could refuse and try to find work as a companion or governess, but with her reputation, it would not be easy. And the threat of Sir Barton loomed if the debts remained unpaid. Alternatively, she could agree to marry a man she didn't know for reasons she didn't understand. She would become the Duchess of Raywood, rise in society again, gain security and comfort, and lose the last thing she had left, her freedom of choice. The irony was bitter. Her father had gambled away her future. Now she had to sell herself to correct his mistake. The next morning, Sophia put on the same burgundy dress she had worn the previous day and went to Grosvenor Square, home to the Duke of Raywood. The building was majestic, 4 stories of dark stone with columns at the entrance and a well-kept garden enclosed by a wrought iron fence. The butler who opened the door gave her a cold look, clearly assessing the simplicity of her clothes in the absence of a carriage. Lady Sophia Hartley, she introduced herself, lifting her chin. The Duke is expecting me. The butler led her into a small drawing room with dark wood paneling, gilded paintings, and velvet furniture. By the window stood a desk covered with documents. His lordship will be here in a minute, announced the butler, before withdrawing. Sophia was left alone. She slowly walked around the room, examining the details. On the table were some drawings, seemingly plans for mines or factories, as well as stacks of business letters, reports, and calculations. The man who worked here was completely immersed in his work. The only personal item was a portrait of a young woman with dark hair and sad eyes. which stood on the mantelpiece. "My mother," came a voice from behind her. Sophia turned around. The Duke stood in the doorway watching her. Today he was dressed in his home clothes. He wore a dark blue frock coat and a gray waistcoat, but no tie. His hair was slightly tousled, as if he had run his hand through it. He looked tired. "She was beautiful," said Sophia, looking at the portrait. She was. He came closer and poured himself some brandy from the decanter on the side table. "She died when I was 12. Fever, I'm sorry," he shrugged. "It was a long time ago." He took a sip, then looked at her. "So you came to give me your answer?" Sophia straightened up. "Before I answer, I have questions, of course." He sank into an armchair and gestured for her to sit down. "Ask away." Sophia sat down and folded her hands in her lap. "Why do you want this marriage? You have everything. Money, a title, and influence. You can marry anyone you want. Why do you want to marry the ruined daughter of a suicide?" He smiled directly at her. "I like her." He leaned back in his chair and swirled his drink. "The answer is simple. I need an heir. I am 36 years old. I have no direct heirs. Otherwise, my fortune will pass to cousins I despise. Therefore, I need a wife. But why should you choose me? Because you are convenient." He spoke as calmly as if he were discussing the purchase of a horse. "You have no family to interfere. There's no ambitious mother who will dictate terms. There are no expectations of love or romance. You are in debt and in desperate need of saving, which means you will be grateful and compliant." Each word hit like a whip. Sophia felt her cheeks flush, but she remained calm. "You're wrong. About what?" "About the last part. I won't be grateful or compliant." She met his gaze directly. "If I marry you, it will be a clean and simple deal. You will get a wife and possible heirs. I will get a name, protection, and a livelihood. But I won't pretend to be grateful that you bought me like a horse at a fair." There was silence. The Duke looked at her with an unreadable expression, then slowly put down his glass and leaned forward. "Continue." "I have conditions," Sophia said firmly. "If you want this marriage, you will listen to them." His lips twitched into a near smile. "How presumptuous. Don't you think you are in no position to dictate terms?" "Perhaps. But if you're looking for a spineless doll who will nod at your every word, you'd better look elsewhere. I'm not that kind of woman." He leaned back, folding his arms across his chest. "Then state your terms, Lady Sophia. Let's see if they're reasonable." Sophia took a deep breath. It was now or never. "Firstly, Weapon, I want my own allowance, not pocket money, but a proper allowance. Enough for me to live independently if necessary. Secondly, I want to continue. Secondly, I will not pretend to be a loving wife in public. We can be polite and courteous, but there should be no false affection. Thirdly," Sophia lifted her chin. "Thirdly, if you take a mistress, and I understand that many men do, at least be discreet. Don't make me a laughingstock." He was silent for so long that she began to worry. Had she gone too far and offended him? Finally he spoke, and there was something new in his voice. "Respect." "You are not what I expected, Lady Sophia." "What did you expect?" "Obedience, feigned gratitude, and tears of relief." He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the street. "Instead, you behave as if I owe you something just because I must," Sophia replied calmly. "You bought the right to marry me, but you did not buy my soul, my character, or my respect. Those things must be earned." He turned around, and there was something in his eyes that she could not understand. Surprise, interest. "I accept your terms," he said. "All three of you will receive an allowance of £1,000 a year. I won't expect any display of affection from you, and I promise to be discreet about any extramarital affairs, should they arise." Sophia exhaled. "So it's settled. Then I agree," she said. "I will marry you." He nodded and sat back down at the table. "Excellent. My secretary will arrange everything, the license, the ceremony, and the legal documents." He began to sort through the papers as if she no longer existed. "The wedding is in 2 weeks. Is that acceptable to you?" "Quite acceptable. The butler will show you out." "Oh, yes." He did not look up from the documents. "You will need some decent dresses. I cannot present my bride to society in rags. The dressmaker will visit you tomorrow." Sophia clenched her fists. Rags. He called her last decent dress rags. Thank you for your concern, your lordship, she said through clenched teeth. Neza. He waved his hand dismissively. Until the wedding, Lady Sophia. She stood up and headed for the door, but then turned around at the threshold. By the way, your lordship. He looked up. Yes? You said you were looking for a convenient marriage. No interference, no emotions, no complications. That's right, Sophia smiled, cold without warmth. Then I'm afraid you've made a terrible choice, she continued. I promise to be the most inconvenient wife you can imagine. She left, leaving him with a frozen expression on his face. The next 2 weeks flew by in a whirlwind of preparations. The dressmaker did indeed arrive, Madame Selina, a French woman with a sharp tongue and an even sharper gaze. She measured Sophia from head to toe, clicking her tongue. Too thin, she said. She needs to eat more, but she has a good figure and delicate bones. We'll work on it. In a week, 3 new dresses appeared. Elegant, but not flashy. One was for the engagement, one for the wedding, and one for everyday wear. They were all empire style with high waists and graceful lines. The colors were muted, gray, olive, and pearl. Sophia tried them on and looked at her reflection, hardly recognizing herself. She looked like a lady again, but felt like an imposter. The Duke sent a carriage twice to discuss the details of the marriage contract and formally introduce her to his close friends. Both times he was polite and courteous, but completely indifferent. He spoke to her in the same way that he spoke to his lawyers, distant and businesslike. Sophia was angry with herself for being hurt by it. She had said herself that she didn't want false affection. So why did his coldness irritate her so much? On the eve of the wedding, Sophia stood at the window of her room and looked out over London at dusk. Tomorrow her life would change forever. She was about to become the Duchess of Raywood, return to the society that had rejected her, and live in luxury with the man who had bought her. She should have felt relief, security, and gratitude. Instead, she felt empty. This was not the marriage she had dreamed of as a girl. There was no love, no romance, and no hope of happiness. It was a cold, practical deal, devoid of illusions. But perhaps that was for the best. Love made people weak, blind, and foolish. Her father loved cards more than his family, and it ruined him. Sophia would not make the same mistake. She would enter this marriage with her eyes open. She would fulfill her role as a wife and perhaps a mother. But she would keep her heart locked away, hidden from the Duke of Raywood. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight, the last night of her old life. Sophia stepped away from the window, climbed into bed, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, a new chapter would begin. She was ready to write it on her own terms. The wedding was to take place in the private chapel of the Raywood estate, an hour's drive from London. It was a small, ivy-covered stone building with stained glass windows, filled with the scent of old wood and palm. Sophia stood before the altar in a pearl dress designed by Madame Selina. It was heavy satin, embroidered with silver thread along the hem and bodice. The long sleeves covered her hands up to her wrists. Her hair was styled into an elaborate updo and adorned with a simple tiara. Contrary to what she had initially thought, it was not a family heirloom, but a new piece bought especially for the occasion. She had no illusions that she was part of an ancient family. She was merely a temporary solution to the problem of an heir. Edmund stood next to her, wearing a black tailcoat and a snow-white shirt. His face was impassive as always. His hands were folded calmly. He looked as if he were attending a business meeting rather than his own wedding. There were few guests. Among them were Lord Eaton, a friend of the Duke, his wife, a lawyer, and a priest. None of Sophia's relatives had come. The priest read the vows monotonously. Sophia responded when prompted, feeling detached from the proceedings, as if she were observing someone else's wedding from afar. Edmund Charles Raywood, do you take Sophia Elizabeth Hartley to be your wife? I do, replied Edmund in an even voice, without looking at her. Sophia Elizabeth Hartley, will you take him as your husband? I will, Sophia echoed. The ring is gold and simple, with no stones. He slipped it onto her finger mechanically, and their fingers touched for a moment. His hand was warm and strong with calluses, which was unusual for an aristocrat. Sophia was briefly surprised by this, but she did not have time to think it through. "You may kiss the bride," announced the priest. Edmund turned to her. He looked into her dark, inscrutable eyes for a moment, then leaned down. The kiss was short and formal. His lips barely touched hers, but even that fleeting contact was enough to stir something inside Sophia. He pulled away first and turned towards the altar to sign the register. It was over. She was married. The wedding breakfast was held in the large hall of the estate. A long table was laden with silver and crystal dishes containing game, pies, and fruit. Everything was of the highest quality, yet cold and impersonal, like a museum exhibit. Sophia sat to Edmund's right, smiling and nodding in response to congratulations when necessary. Lady Ashley, a plump and friendly woman, tried to engage Sophia in conversation about the London season, but she barely listened. Meanwhile, Edmund talked to Lord Ashley about business, mines, a new bill in Parliament, and coal prices. He never once looked at his new wife, treating her as if she were part of the furniture. Sophia cut the meat on her plate, but didn't put any in her mouth. Her appetite had disappeared. A tight knot of anxiety twisted in her stomach. Tonight, she would officially become his wife. She knew it would happen. She had known it when she agreed to the marriage. He needed an heir, and for that he needed a wedding night. It was part of the deal she had accepted. But knowing something in your mind and accepting it in your heart are two different things. Sophia had never been with a man before. She had been raised strictly and taught etiquette, music, dancing, and languages. However, what happened between husband and wife was discussed in hints and whispers. Her mother died when she was 10 and didn't have the opportunity to tell her. Her governess had blushed and muttered indistinctly about duty and obedience. Now she was about to share a bed with a stranger who was looking at her as if she were a piece of acquired property. "Duchess, you don't look well," Lady Ashley's voice rang out. Sophia shuddered, returning to reality. Everyone was looking at her. "I'm sorry, I'm a little tired." Edmund finally turned to her, giving her an appraising look. Of course, it had been a long day. He stood up and extended his hand. "Let me show you to your chambers. You can rest before dinner." Sophia took his hand and stood up. They said goodbye to the guests and went out into the hallway. The Raywood estate was enormous. There were enfilades of rooms, wide staircases, and portraits of ancestors on the walls. Servants bowed silently as they passed. Edmund led her up the stairs to the second floor and then down a long corridor to the far wing. "Your rooms," he announced, stopping at a carved door. "Bedroom, boudoir, dressing room. My bedroom is through the connecting door." He nodded towards the door in the wall. "If you need anything, just ring the bell. The maid will be nearby." Sophia nodded, not knowing what to say. He stood there for a moment, then turned to leave. "Edmund," she called, surprised at her own boldness. He turned back. "Yes?" Tonight, she didn't know how to put it. It was different. "You." Understanding flashed in his eyes. Something in his face softened at the sight of her. Barely noticeable, but she caught it. "I'll come tonight," he said calmly. "It's necessary, but I'll try to be delicate." Then he left, leaving her alone. Sophia spent the rest of the day exploring her new quarters. The bedroom was spacious with high ceilings and a large canopy bed with carved posts. The wallpaper was cream-colored, the furniture was made of dark wood, and the carpet was Persian. Everything was expensive and exquisite, yet impersonal. It was clear that the room had not been used for years. A maid named Bessie, a young girl with a round face, helped her change into her day dress, then brought her tea and quietly withdrew. Sophia sat by the window looking out at the gardens, drinking her cold tea and trying to calm her nerves. At 7 p.m., Bessie returned to help her get ready for dinner. She put on an olive-colored dress, had her hair done, and went down to the small dining room where Edmund was waiting for them. Dinner passed in tense silence. Edmund read some papers between courses. Sophia picked at her food. Conversation was difficult. Finally, when dessert was served, Edmund put down his papers and looked at her. "Are you satisfied with your rooms?" "Yes, thank you. My housekeeper will show you around the estate tomorrow and explain your duties as mistress of the house." "All right," pause. He poured himself a brandy and took a sip. "Sophia," he began, and she was surprised. It was the first time he had addressed her by name. "I understand that today has been difficult for you. This marriage is not what you dreamed of in your youth, and it is not what I dreamed of either," she replied. He smiled slightly. Fair enough, but I want you to understand that I am not a monster. I won't. He paused, choosing his words. I won't be cruel. I won't demand the impossible. But there are certain obligations that must be fulfilled. I understand, said Sophia, lifting her chin. You need an heir. It's part of the deal. His jaw tensed. You talk about it so coldly. How else can I talk about it? You said it yourself. It's a convenient marriage. No illusions. She met his gaze. I won't pretend it's anything more than that. He finished his brandy and set the glass down sharply. All right, since we're being frank, I'll be waiting for you in an hour. Get ready. He left the dining room, leaving her with her heart pounding. Bessie helped Sophia get ready for the night. She loosened Sophia's hair, combed it until it shone, and helped her change into a snow-white batiste nightgown with lace trim that Madame Selina had bought especially for the wedding night. The fabric was thin and almost transparent, making Sophia feel naked. Don't worry, milady, said Bessie quietly, smoothing out the folds. His lordship. He is a good man, strict, but fair. He will not hurt you. Sophia nodded, unable to speak. Bessie drew the bed curtains, lit the candles on the bedside tables, and left, wishing her a good night. Sophia remained alone on the edge of the bed, clasping her hands to her knees, waiting. The minutes dragged on painfully. Somewhere downstairs, a clock struck 10. The room was quiet except for the crackling of the candles and the rustling of the wind outside the window. Then footsteps were heard in the corridor. The connecting door opened. Edmund entered, wearing a dark blue silk robe. His hair was slightly damp. Apparently he had managed to have a wash. His face was calm, and his expression was unreadable. He stopped at the door and looked at her. Sophia forced herself to stand up straight. She would not cower in fear. Sophia, he said quietly, if you're not ready, we can postpone it. No, we can't, she replied quickly. Let's get it over with. His eyebrows knitted together. Get it over with. You're talking as if it were an execution, isn't it? He slowly moved closer, stopping a step away from her. There shouldn't be torture between a husband and wife. It's a necessary part of marriage. A necessary part. Sophia swallowed, feeling her pulse quicken. I don't know what to do, she whispered. Something changed in his gaze. It softened. Don't do anything. Just trust me. What happened next remained between them. As promised, Edmund was delicate and patient. He didn't rush, giving her time to get used to the intimacy. The pain was there, but it wasn't unbearable. When it was over, he didn't leave straight away, but stayed close by for a few more minutes. His presence was strangely comforting. When he finally got up to go to his room, he turned around at the door. Good night, Sophia. Good night, she echoed. The door closed behind him, and she was left alone. Sophia lay in the dark, listening to her body. The ache between her legs was bearable. She was no longer a virgin. She was a wife in the truest sense. Strangely enough, it wasn't terrible. Awkward, yes, but Edmund had been attentive and caring in his own way. It was not at all what she had expected from a coal man who had bought her. The morning dawned gray outside the windows, accompanied by a knock at the door. Bessie entered with a tray of steaming tea and toast. Good morning, Your Grace, she said, greeting her and placing the tray on the table. His lordship had already eaten breakfast and left for London on business. He had asked her to tell Sophia that he would be back for dinner. Sophia sat up in bed and pulled the blanket up to her chest. So Edmund had left without even saying goodbye. A strange resentment welled up inside her, but she ignored it. Thank you, Bessie. The maid helped her get up, wash, and get dressed. Sophia chose a simple gray morning gown and let Bessie gather her hair into a low bun. When she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she saw the same woman as yesterday, but now she was a duchess and a wife. The housekeeper, Mrs. Grum, a gray-haired lady with a sharp gaze, showed her around the estate and explained the duties of a hostess, supervision of the household, menu planning, and receiving guests. Sophia listened attentively, nodded, and took notes. The day passed in a flurry of activity. By evening, she was exhausted. Her head was spinning from the abundance of new information. She changed for dinner and went down to the dining room, where Edmund was already waiting. He stood up when she appeared and nodded in greeting. His face wore the same impenetrable mask. Sophia, how was your day? Productive. Mrs. Graham showed me around the estate. Good, they sat down. The meal began. The conversation was formal and strained. Edmund talked about business in London. She talked about her meeting with the housekeeper. There was not a word about last night, nor any hint of the intimacy they had shared. It was as if nothing had happened. Sophia cut the meat onto plates, feeling her anger gradually boil up inside her. Was he really going to pretend that there was nothing between them? That she was just a function, an incubator for an heir? Edmund, she interrupted, cutting short his story about some mines. He looked up. Yes, I have a personal question. His eyebrows rose. I'm listening. Sophia put down her knife and fork and met his gaze directly. You're always like this, cold and distant, as if nothing matters. Silence. He slowly put down his wine glass. What are you talking about? About us? She waved her hand between them. Last night we shared a bed. Today you're acting like I'm a piece of furniture. You didn't even say goodbye this morning. His jaw tensed. I didn't want to wake you, he said. I had important things to do. There are always important things to do, aren't there? Sophia leaned forward. Tell me honestly, she said, are you even capable of feeling? Or have you closed yourself off so much that you've become nothing more than a money-making machine? Something flashed in his eyes, anger and pain. She didn't have time to figure it out. Careful, Sophie, he warned quietly. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. She didn't back down. Explain why you bought a wife instead of just finding a mistress for your heirs. Explain why you're so afraid of attachment. He stood up abruptly and threw down his napkin. You want to know? Fine. He walked around the table and stopped next to her, looming over her. I was engaged 10 years ago to Isabella Grant, the Count's daughter. We loved each other and planned our wedding, our future, and our children. Sophia froze as she listened. A week before the wedding, she ran away, he continued, and the old pain sounded in his voice. With my cousin. They went to Scotland, got married, and left me a note saying that she loved him and not me, that I was too cold and too busy with work, and that I was incapable of love. He turned away and looked out of the window. I swore that I would never allow myself to feel that way again. I would never let anyone hurt me again. That's why I chose you, a woman who doesn't need to pretend, a woman who understands that this is a business arrangement, not love. Sophia slowly got up, approached him, and put her hand on his shoulder. He flinched and pulled away. Don't pretend that you don't care. We both know the truth. This is a marriage of convenience, nothing more. What if I say I don't want it to be just a deal? Sophia said quietly. He turned around and looked at her suspiciously. What makes you think you are the only one who builds walls? Sophia wrapped her arms around herself. I'm afraid too. I'm afraid to open up. I'm afraid to trust. My father destroyed everything I knew. Society turned its back on me in a single day. I learned not to expect kindness, not to hope for help. But maybe, she paused, maybe we can't love each other, but we can at least respect each other. We can be friends, something more than a cold deal. Edmund looked at her for a long time, his expression changing from distrust to hope to fear. Finally, he said, I don't know how. I don't know if I can. Then we'll learn together, replied Sophia. There was a moment of silence. Then he slowly reached out his hand. She took it, and their fingers intertwined. It was a small step, but a step nonetheless, and perhaps the beginning of something new. A week had passed since their conversation at dinner. It had been a week of a strange truce during which they had both tried to find common ground, but hadn't known how. Edmund still traveled to London on business and returned in the evening. On 2 occasions that week, he came to her silently at night and fulfilled his marital duty with the same delicate detachment. Afterwards, Sophia lay in the dark, trying to understand what she was feeling. It wasn't disgust, but it wasn't closeness either. It was just emptiness. On the morning of the 8th day, she was awoken by an unusual noise. Voices in the hallway, footsteps, doors slamming. Sophia threw on her robe and looked out of the bedroom window. Servants with worried faces were rushing down the hallway. What's going on? She asked a passing maid. The girl curtsied. There's trouble at the North Mine, Your Grace. It collapsed. His Grace had left for the mine an hour ago. Sophia felt her heart sink. A mine collapse meant injuries, possibly even fatalities. How many people were there? They say more than 30, he replied. The night shift. Sophia quickly got dressed and went downstairs. Mrs. Graham was giving orders in the kitchen, instructing the staff to prepare broth, gather bandages, and collect medicines. His lordship ordered that everything necessary for the wounded be prepared, the housekeeper explained. The wounded would be brought here to the East Wing. There is no hospital in the village, and the city is far away. What can I do? Sophia asked. Mrs. Graham looked at her in surprise. Your lordship, you shouldn't. It's dirty work, blood and wounds. I'm not afraid of blood, Sophia replied firmly. I have hands. I can help. What needs to be done? The housekeeper hesitated, then nodded. Then help prepare the rooms in the East Wing. We need to remove the furniture, lay out sheets, and get some water. Sophia rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The next few hours passed in a flurry of feverish activity. The servants carried furniture out of the guest rooms, covered the floors with straw, and set up beds. Sophia worked alongside everyone else, carrying buckets of water, folding bandages, and helping to carry mattresses. By noon, the first carts carrying wounded miners began to arrive. Dirty, bloodied miners. Some moaned, others were silent, their faces frozen in pain. Sophia saw Edmund. He was driving one of the carts himself. His face was covered in soot, his clothes were torn, and his hands were bloody. Their eyes met for a moment, and she saw surprise and respect in his eyes for the first time. Without saying a word, he nodded and began to help unload the wounded. The village doctor, the elderly Dr. Fowler, was already waiting. He examined each of the wounded one by one, giving orders as he went. Sophia was nearby, helping to hold the wounded while the doctor bandaged their wounds and applied splints to broken bones. Water, Your Grace, the doctor said, not looking up from his work. Sophia brought him clean cloths. Then she provided more bandages and held the young man's shoulders while the doctor removed a splinter from his side. The young man screamed and writhed, and Sophia could feel her own muscles tensing from the effort of holding him down. When it was over, she looked at her hands. They were covered in blood and dirt. Her nails were broken, her dress was ruined beyond repair, and her hair was tousled and out of place. She looked terrible, but she felt alive and useful. Your Highness, Edmund's voice sounded behind her. She turned around. He was standing in the doorway, looking as dirty and tired as she did. His face wore an incomprehensible expression. You should rest, he said. You've been working all day. So have you, Sophia replied. How many are dead? His face darkened. By 5. 2 more are in a serious condition. I don't know if they'll survive. What happened? The old support structure collapsed. He ran his hand over his face, leaving a streak of soot. I warned the manager that repairs were needed, he said, but he said it was too expensive. We could wait. And now look at the result. His voice was bitter and angry. Where is the manager now? Sophia asked. He's downstairs trying to justify himself. Edmund clenched his fists. I have to deal with this. But first he looked at her. Thank you for your help. I didn't expect you to stay. Where else could I go? Sophia shrugged. This is my home now. These people work for you, which means they work for me too. Their families too. She paused, remembering. Their families, she repeated. God, the victims must have had wives and children. Someone has to tell them and help them, Edmund nodded. I'll go to the village after I've spoken to the manager. No, I will, Sophia said firmly. You need to deal with the idiot who caused the collapse, and I'll go to the families. That's the duty of the lady of the manor, isn't it? He looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. Take the carriage and Mrs. Graham with you. She knows all the families. The village of Raywood was half a mile from the estate. It had small stone houses with thatched roofs and narrow streets, and a church in the central square. Sophia had never been to such a place before. She had always lived in mansions and ballrooms. Mrs. Graham led her to the first house. A young woman with a child in her arms opened the door. Her face was full of hope, but it turned to horror when she saw the expression on the housekeeper's face. No, she whispered. No, please, not Tom, not my Tom. Sophia didn't know what to say. What can you say in such a situation? What words could comfort a woman who had lost her husband? I'm so sorry, she said. Mrs. Miller. whispered the woman, pressing the child to her breast. Tears streamed down her face. What will I do now? How will I feed my children? We have 3 of them. 3. Sophia remembered the conditions she had negotiated with Edmund before the wedding. She had her own allowance, money she could spend as she wished. The Duke will take care of you, she said firmly. Your family will receive a pension. You can keep the house. The children will go to school. I will personally see to it. Mrs. Graham looked at her in surprise but said nothing. They visited 4 more houses, 4 conversations with widows, each of which was heartbreaking. Sophia promised to help each of them, not knowing if she had the right to make such promises. But she couldn't remain silent or just walk away and leave these women alone with their grief and poverty. By the time they returned to the estate, it was dark. Sophia went into the small living room where she found Edmund sitting at a table covered with papers. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped, and his face frozen with fatigue. The manager has been dismissed, he said without looking up. I sent him away without a reference. I need to find a new one and check the condition of all the mines to make sure this doesn't happen again. Edmund, Sophia interrupted. He looked up, and she saw something broken in his eyes. I promised the widow a pension, she said, and a school for the children. I hope you don't mind. He was silent for a few seconds, then shook his head. No, it's right. I was going to do it myself, but I didn't know how to go about it. He leaned back in his chair. You surprised me, Sophia. I thought you would stay in your room, far away from all this dirt and blood. And you? And me? She asked, coming closer. You turned out to be stronger than I thought. He stood up and walked over to the window. When we were engaged, Isabella, there was a fire at one of my factories. 3 people were burned. When I told Isabella about it, she burst into tears, saying that it was too unpleasant for a lady and that she didn't want to hear about such terrible things. Sophia came over and stood next to him. I'm not Isabella. Yes, he agreed quietly. You're not like her at all, and I'm beginning to think. He turned to her. When I chose you, I didn't know how lucky I was. Something warm spread through Sophia's chest. It wasn't a declaration of love, no, but it was respect, recognition. Edmund, I want to tell you something, she began. When I agreed to this marriage, I thought it was just a deal, a way to survive. But today I saw who you really are. Not a cold businessman who buys a wife like an object, but a man who went down into the mine himself to rescue the injured, who blames himself for trusting a bad manager. She fell silent, not knowing how to put it into words. Who? He whispered quietly. Who? He's not as bad as he tries to appear, she said. He smiled, for the first time sincerely. That's the biggest compliment you can expect from me. They stood close, almost touching. Sophia could see the fatigue on his face and the soot that he had never washed off. She noticed the old scar above his eyebrow for the first time. How did you get that scar? She asked without thinking. He automatically touched his forehead. I fell off a horse when I was 2. I tried to jump over a fence that not even my father could clear. Stupidity and pride. So you weren't always so cautious and calculating. I used to be completely different, he admitted quietly. Impulsive, reckless, believing in love and justice. Then life taught me that these things are a luxury not everyone can afford. Sophia raised her hand and touched the scar with her fingertips. He froze, not pulling away. Maybe, she whispered, you've just forgotten how to allow yourself luxuries. Their faces were so close that she could feel his breath. He looked at her, and the flames from the fireplace danced in his eyes. Sophia. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. The maid entered. Excuse me, Your Grace, but Dr. Fowler is asking for you. One of the wounded has regained consciousness and is asking for the Duke. Edmund exhaled and stepped back. I'm coming. He looked at Sophia. You need to rest. You've done a tremendous job today. So have you. He nodded and left. Sophia was left alone in the living room, staring at the fire. Something was changing between them. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, but inevitably. Today's tragedy had revealed a different side to each of them. She saw not a cold buyer in him, but a man who felt responsible for his people. He saw her not as a weak socialite, but as a woman who could hold her own in a crisis. Perhaps this marriage would be about more than just a simple transaction. Perhaps. 3 days later, an unexpected guest arrived at the estate. Sophia was busy in the library. While sorting through the accounts, she asked Mrs. Graham to teach her how to run the household. The housekeeper gladly agreed, but then the butler announced a visitor. Lady Isabella Carrington wishes to see his lordship. Lady Isabella Carrington wishes to see his lordship, he said. Sophia looked up from her papers. It was Isabella, the very same woman who had broken Edmund's heart 10 years ago. His lordship is in the north wing examining the wounded, Sophie said, feeling her muscles tense. I can receive the visitor in his place. The butler hesitated. Lady Isabella insisted on meeting the Duke himself. Nevertheless, I will be informed, Sophia replied firmly. Show her into the small drawing room. A few minutes later, Sophia went downstairs. She had not changed her clothes, choosing to remain in the simple day dress she had been wearing while working on the accounts. Her hair was simply gathered back. No jewelry. She wanted this woman to see her as she was. In the small drawing room stood a beautiful woman, tall and slender, with dark hair and porcelain skin. She wore a fashionable emerald-colored dress. Adorned with expensive jewelry, she surveyed the room as though she once considered it her own. Lady Carrington, Sophia greeted her as she entered. I am the Duchess of Raywood. Isabella turned to face her, giving her an appraising look. A condescending smile appeared on her lips. Ah, yes, Edmund's new wife. I've heard about you, the daughter of a suicide victim whom he bought at a debt auction. How romantic. Sophia felt a pang of anger, but remained calm. What brings you to our house, Lady Carrington? I wanted to see Edmund. Isabella sat down on the sofa without waiting to be invited. I have business with him. What kind of business? Isabella smiled more broadly. Personal. It's hardly any of your concern. Everything that concerns my husband concerns me, Sophia replied, sitting down opposite his chair. They looked at each other, two women connected by one man, the past versus the present. Sophia saw calculation, self-confidence, and a winning streak in Isabella's eyes. Suddenly, she realized that this woman hadn't come just to see an old acquaintance. She had come to reclaim what she had once discarded. You're making a mistake, Sophia said quietly. Isabella raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry, but if you think you can just come back into his life, you're mistaken. Sophia stood up and walked over to the window. He's not the same man you knew. Even if he were, he's my husband, and I'm not going to share him. Isabella laughed loudly and contemptuously. What touching loyalty. But my dear, you must realize that your marriage is a business arrangement. Many years ago, Edmund himself told me that if he ever remarried, it would be purely for convenience, without feelings or illusions. And here you are, convenient, submissive, and ready to turn a blind eye to his infatuation. Sophia turned to meet her gaze. You don't know me, Lady Carrington. You don't know what I'm capable of, and you have no idea what's really between Edmund and me. So let me give you some advice. Leave before I ask you to, in a less polite manner. A voice sounded at the door. Sophia is right. You should leave, Isabella. Both women turned around. Edmund was standing in the doorway, leaning against the doorframe. His face was cold and stern. Edmund! Isabella jumped up and reached out her hands. Finally, she said. I've been wanting to see you so much. What do you want? He interrupted her. I'm very busy. Isabella was taken aback. She hadn't expected such a reception at all. I came to talk about us, about what happened, she replied. Nothing happened, Edmund replied coldly. 10 years ago, you made your choice. Now live with it. But I made a mistake. Isabella's voice trembled. Charles turned out not to be who I thought he was. He squandered my devotion and took mistresses. We are unhappy, and that is my fault. Stepping closer, Isabella lowered her voice. You loved me, I know you did, and I loved you too. We can still be together. We can't do anything, Edmund interrupted. I'm married. Happily married. He looked at Sophia, and something in his gaze changed. It became warmer towards the woman who was worth 10 times more than him. Sophia felt her breath catch. Isabella followed his gaze and turned pale. You can't be serious. She's just a girl from a broken home. She's a woman, Edmund corrected her harshly. My wife and the Duchess of Raywood. If you ever speak of her like that again, I will ensure you are no longer welcome in any respectable household. I'm being clear. Isabella stood, pale and trembling, then turned and ran out of the room. Silence. Sophia and Edmund looked at each other across the room. I'm sorry, he finally said. I didn't know she was coming. You don't have to apologize, Sophia replied. Everyone has a past. He moved closer. What I said about being happily married. I didn't just say that to scare her away. No, no, he took her hand in his. Over the last few days, I've been watching you work with the wounded, visit widows, and try to figure out the farm accounts. You didn't have to do all that. You could have stayed on the sidelines like many wives do. But you, I don't want to be that kind of wife, Sophia interrupted. I don't want it to be a decoration in your house. I want to be a partner. I want this marriage to mean more than just a piece of paper with signatures on it. Edmund pulled her closer. His hand rested on her waist. Then let's try. Let's really try to build something real. Not a deal, but a union, a partnership. And maybe, Sophia placed her hands on his chest and felt his heartbeat. Maybe in time, it will become something more. Maybe, he whispered, kissing her. This kiss was different to the one on their wedding night. It wasn't just a perfunctory fulfillment of duty. It was a kiss between two people who were beginning to open up to each other. Slow and lingering, it promised so much. When they finally pulled apart, Sophia pressed her forehead against his chest. We understand that it's crazy to try to build something real from such a beginning, she said. The craziest thing I've ever done, Edmund agreed, hugging her. But you know what? I think I'm willing to take that risk with you. Sophia realized that she too was ready to try to turn their arranged marriage into something real, something that could be called. 3 weeks had passed since Isabella's visit, 3 weeks during which something had changed imperceptibly between Sophia and Edmund. He began to linger over breakfast, talking about his plans for the day. She started asking about his plans, and to her surprise, he answered in detail as if he valued her opinion. In the evenings, they often sat in the library. He read reports and books, and the silence between them was cozy, not tense. The nights had changed too. Edmund came to her more often, and their intimacy became more than just the fulfillment of marital duty. It became something warmer and more personal. He learned to read her reactions. She learned to relax in his arms. They didn't talk about it out loud, but they both felt the walls between them gradually crumbling. On Monday morning at breakfast, Edmund put down his newspaper and looked at Sophia. We need to go to London, he said. Sophia looked up from her cup of tea. What do you? The season is in full swing. As the Duchess of Raywood, you must attend the main events. He paused. Besides, people need to see us together. The rumors about our marriage are not all favorable. Sophia put down her cup, feeling a familiar tightness in her stomach. London. The society that had turned its back on her 3 months ago. The people who stopped acknowledging her in the street when they found out about her father's debts. Are you afraid? Edmund asked quietly. It would be foolish to deny it. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. You are no longer the girl they turned their backs on. You are the Duchess of Raywood, one of the most influential women in England. I'll always be there for you. Sophia looked at their joined hands. When had he become like this? Not a cold buyer, but a source of support she could rely on. When are we leaving? The day after tomorrow. Countess Holland is hosting a grand ball on Saturday. It's a good way to officially introduce you to society. Sophia nodded, though her anxiety remained. The Duke of Raywood's London mansion was located on Grosvenor Square, a majestic building made of light stone with columns and balconies. Sophia had been here once before the wedding, but she had hardly noticed the details at that time. This time she was entering as the mistress of the house, and the servants lined up to greet her. The butler, Mr. Holmes, a gray-haired gentleman with impeccable manners, introduced her to the housekeeper, the maids and the cooks. Sophia smiled and nodded, trying to remember their names. Your rooms, Your Grace, announced Mr. Holmes, leading her to the second floor. Her bedroom was luxurious with peach-colored silk wallpaper, a massive four-poster bed and mahogany furniture. The windows overlooked the square, and the room was completely unlike the modest rooms on the estate. My bedroom is through this door, said Edmund, nodding towards the connecting passageway. If you need anything, just call. Sophia looked around the room and walked over to the window. Below, carriages rolled down the street and ladies and gentlemen strolled by. This was London, the city where she had once been happy and where she had lost everything. "Sophia," Edmund called to her. She turned around. He was standing in the doorway watching her. "I know it's not easy for you," he said, "coming back here and facing people who—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Who turned their backs on me," Sophia finished. "Yes, it's not easy, but you're right. I'm not that girl anymore. I survived. I became stronger, and I won't let them hurt me again." A smile appeared on his face, warm and proud. "That's what I wanted to hear." The next 2 days were spent preparing for the ball. Madame Selna arrived with 3 new dresses. One was for the ball, and the other 2 were for daytime outings. Sophia tried them on while her partner pinned and adjusted them to her figure. The ball gown was exquisite, a deep ruby shade, almost burgundy, with gold embroidery on the bodice and hem. It had a high waist and a fitted bodice, and she wore long leather gloves with it. The dress came with jewelry from the Raywood collection, a ruby necklace, earrings, and a bracelet. "You will be the queen of the ball, Your Highness," Madame Selina assured her. "Everyone will be looking only at you." That was exactly what Sophia feared. On Saturday evening, she stood in front of the mirror and looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror looked confident, elegant, and powerful. She was nothing like the girl who had stood at the debt auction 3 months ago. There was a knock at the door. Edmund entered, dressed in an evening suit. He wore a black tailcoat, a snow-white shirt, and a gray waistcoat, and his hair was styled. He had an expression of restrained elegance on his face. But when he saw Sophia, something changed in his eyes. They darkened and became sharper. "You look—" He paused, searching for words. "Stunning." Sophia felt her cheeks flush. "Thank you." He approached her and took a velvet box out of his pocket. "It belonged to my mother. I would like you to wear it." Inside was an exquisite tiara set with antique rubies and diamonds. Sophia gasped. "Edmund, this is too much." "You are a duchess, Raywood," he interrupted. "You have the right to wear the family jewels." He took the tiara and carefully placed it in her hair. His fingers lingered for a moment on her temple. Perfect. Their eyes met in the mirror. Sophia saw something new in his eyes, pride and admiration, as well as something else that made her heart beat faster. "Are you ready?" he asked, holding out his hand. "As ready as I can be," Sophia replied, taking it. The Countess Holland's mansion in Mayfair was aglow with lights. Carriages lined the street. Guests in luxurious attire ascended the wide staircase. Music poured from the open windows, mingling with the hum of voices and laughter. Sophia squeezed Edmund's hand tighter as their carriage stopped at the entrance. "Breathe," he whispered. "Remember who you are, and remember that I am here." They stepped out of the carriage and several heads turned in their direction. A whisper ran through the crowd. "It's her, Lord Hartley's daughter, now the Duchess of Raywood. They say he bought her at auction. How romantic or scandalous." Sophia lifted her chin and straightened her back. She was no longer that frightened girl, so let them talk. They entered the mansion. It was a huge ballroom, decorated with flowers and crystal chandeliers. There were hundreds of guests in luxurious dresses, an orchestra on a platform, and waiters with trays of champagne. The butler announced them, His Grace the Duke of Raywood and Her Grace the Duchess of Raywood. Conversations died down and everyone turned around. Sophia could feel their eyes on her, full of curiosity, envy, and judgment. But Edmund held her hand tightly. His presence beside her was an anchor. The Countess of Holland, a plump lady of about 60 with piercing eyes, was the first to approach. "Edmund, what a pleasure. And this is your new Duchess." She gave Sophia an appraising look. "Yes, I see the rumors were not exaggerated. Very pretty." "Welcome, my dear." "Thank you, milady." Sophia curtsied. "I hope you dance." The Countess smiled. It would be a shame if such a couple didn't open the ball. Edmund looked at Sophia with pleasure. "If my wife agrees," he said, and he led Sophia to the center of the hall. The orchestra began to play a waltz. They began to dance, and the world narrowed down to just the two of them. "You're doing wonderfully," Edmund whispered as he spun her around. "I'm just following you," Sophia replied. "No, you're holding yourself like a queen." His hand tightened around her waist. "I'm proud of you." Something warm spread through Sophia's chest. She pressed herself a little closer, forgetting the hundreds of eyes watching them. When the waltz ended, guests immediately approached them, making introductions, offering congratulations, and asking curious questions. Sophia responded politely but reservedly, giving no cause for gossip. Then she saw her, Lady Vernon, the Viscount's wife, and her former friend. They had gone to balls together, shared secrets, and laughed at the foolishness of young suitors. But after Sophia's father took his own life, Lady Vernon stopped answering her letters. Their eyes met across the room. Lady Vernon froze for a moment, then turned away and became engrossed in conversation with other ladies. Sophia felt a twinge of pain. The old pain of betrayal returned. "Who is that?" Edmund asked quietly, having noticed her reaction. "No one," Sophie replied. "Just a ghost from the past." But Edmund did not let the subject drop. He followed her gaze. He saw Lady Vernon. "Wait here," he said, heading across the room. Sophia wanted to stop him, but it was too late. He approached the group where Lady Vernon was standing and said something to her. Sophia was too far away to hear what he said, but she saw Lady Vernon turn pale and her hands tremble. A minute later, Edmund returned and took Sophia by the arm. "Come on, it's stuffy in here. Let's go out onto the terrace." The terrace was cool and quiet. Sophie leaned against the railing and looked out at the garden. "What did you say to her?" she asked. "I told her that if she ever ignores my wife again, I'll make sure her husband is denied the loans he desperately needs." Edmund shrugged. "Viscount Vernon has money problems. That gives me leverage." Sophia turned around. "You shouldn't have." "I had to," he interrupted. "No one has the right to hurt you. No one." He was standing so close that she could see every line of his face in the moonlight. She could see the determination and the rage he was holding back. "Why, Bishkan," she whispered, "why do you defend me so fiercely?" "Because you're mine," he replied simply. "My wife, my Duchess, mine." He fell silent, as if frightened by what he had almost said. Sophia took a step closer and placed her hands on his chest. "Yours." He looked at her for a long time, struggling with something inside, then pulled her towards him and kissed her. It was hard and passionate, unlike any kiss they had shared before. It was the kiss of a man who could no longer hold back. Sophia responded with equal intensity, pressing herself against him and feeling his heart beating beneath her palms. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. "Let's go home," Edmund croaked. "Right now, but to hell with the ball." He took her by the hand and pulled her toward the exit. "I want to be alone with you right now." They ran away from the ball like children stealing sweets. The carriage took them to Gravenor Square in record time. Edmund could hardly wait for the door to close behind the footman before pulling Sophia towards him again. They climbed the stairs, kissing, stumbling, and laughing. Edmund led her to his bedroom. It was masculine, with dark furniture and the scent of leather and tobacco. What happened next was unlike any previous intimacy they had experienced. It was passionate, impulsive, and almost desperate. They tore each other's clothes off, kissed, touched, and rediscovered each other. When it was over, they lay there embracing and listening to each other's heartbeats. "Sophia," Edmund whispered in the darkness. "Yes," I thought. "I thought I was buying a convenient marriage. I thought I could keep you at a distance. I wouldn't allow myself to feel." Sophia rolled over and looked at him. "And I was an idiot." He ran his fingers through her hair, which was scattered across the pillow. "You got under my skin, into my thoughts, into my—" He fell silent. "Heart," she whispered softly. He nodded, unable to speak. Sophia pressed herself against him, resting her head on his chest. "You know what's strange? I also thought I could keep my distance, that it would just be a deal, a way to survive. But then I saw you in the mine. I saw how you care for your people and how you protect me, even when I don't ask." I realized that his hand was stroking her back and that she was falling in love with the man who had stolen her heart without even knowing it. Edmund froze, then rolled her onto her back and hovered above her. In the moonlight, his eyes looked almost black. "Say it again. I'm falling in love with you," Sophia whispered. Slowly, against all common sense, "It's happening." He kissed her gently this time, reverently. "I don't know how to love properly," he said. "Isabella said I was too cold." "Isabella was too stupid," Sophia interrupted. "You're not cold, you're cautious. You protect yourself. But you open up a little more every day, and I'll wait as long as it takes for you to let yourself feel again. Edmund pressed his forehead against hers. I don't know if I deserve you. That's not for you to decide, Sophia smiled. I've already decided. You're mine. Whether or not you bought me, it doesn't matter now, because I choose you every day. He kissed her again, and they lost themselves in each other once more. This time, however, it was slower and gentler, full of unspoken promises. Morning came, sunlight streaming through the heavy curtains. Sophia woke up in Edmund's arms. His arm was around her waist. His face was hidden in her hair. She turned carefully to look at him. Asleep, he looked younger and more peaceful. The crease between his eyebrows had smoothed out and his lips were relaxed. Sophia couldn't resist running her finger over his cheek. He opened his eyes and there was something warm and new in them. Good morning. Good morning, she echoed. They lay there looking at each other and understanding without words that something had changed last night. A barrier had finally broken down. Sophia, Edmund began, what you said yesterday about falling in love, why news? I don't take back what I said, she replied quickly. Even if you're not ready to respond in kind, it's not that I'm not ready, he said slowly. It's that I'm afraid. I'm afraid to open up again and lose you. I'm afraid I won't be able to give you what you need. Sophia sat up, pulling the sheet over her chest. Edmund, listen to me. I'm not Isabella. I won't run away. I won't betray you. I'm here. I chose you. I'll stay, even when it's hard and you close yourself off and push me away, because I can see the real you beneath all that armor, and I like what I see. He sat down next to her and took her hands in his. You're either the bravest woman I know, or the stupidest, he said. Sophia smiled. To fall in love with a man who bought me at auction. Then we're both fools, he said quietly. Because I'm falling in love too. I tried to resist, telling myself it was just habit and convenience, but you're right. You've gotten under my skin and into my heart, and now I can't imagine my life without you. Sophia felt tears welling up in her eyes. That's the closest thing to a confession of love I've ever heard from you. Then so be it. He pulled her towards him. I love you, Sophia. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was when you first looked at me with your stubborn chin and said you wouldn't be grateful. Or maybe it was when you helped the wounded, unafraid of blood and dirt, or when you defended me from Isabella. But it happened, and I can't pretend anymore. Sophia hugged him, burying her face in his shoulder. Tears flowed freely, happy tears. I love you too. I love your coldness, which is actually a sign of your caring nature. I love your caution, which is really just wisdom. I love how you try to protect me from everyone. They sat there embracing while London woke up outside the window. They had started with a cold deal, but had found something priceless. Real, imperfect, frightening love that was theirs alone. Maybe that was the best way to start. With honesty, with respect, and gradually discovering each other. The Duke who bought a heart without realizing it, and the lady who sold herself for freedom, but who found something more. Love. The next 2 weeks in London were like the honeymoon they hadn't had after the wedding. Edmund canceled some of his business meetings to spend more time with Sophia. They walked in Hyde Park and went to the opera and theater. In the evenings, they would sit in the library. He would read and she would embroider or sort through the household accounts. The silence between them was warm and cozy. The nights were especially sweet. After intimacy, Edmund no longer went to his room, but stayed and pulled Sophia close to him. They would talk in the dark about their childhoods, their dreams, and the kind of parents they wanted to be. Sophia learned that Edmund loved poetry, though he had never admitted it. She learned that he once wanted to be an artist, but his father considered it an inappropriate occupation for a gentleman. Why don't you paint now, he asked one night, stroking her hair. Sophia shrugged. I don't know. I guess I forgot how. Remember, said Edmund confidently, tomorrow I'll buy you everything you need. Paints, canvases, brushes. You can paint as much as you want. Sophia propped herself up on her elbows and looked at him in the moonlight. Seriously? Absolutely. You're my wife, not my property. I want you to be happy and to do what you love. Sophia kissed him long and gratefully. The next day, Edmund brought her a whole arsenal of art supplies. She set up a studio in one of the sunny rooms overlooking the garden and picked up a brush for the first time in years. The first thing she painted was a portrait of Edmund. He sat in an armchair by the fireplace reading a book, not posing deliberately, but simply living his normal life. Sophia tried to capture the expression on his face as he read, focused, yet relaxed, and almost peaceful. However, not everything was perfect. Sometimes Sophia noticed Edmund withdrawing into himself. This happened especially when they attended balls and met couples who had clearly been in love since their youth. "What are you thinking about?" she asked him one evening. One evening, after returning from a reception at the Duke of Devonshire's, Edmund stood at the bedroom window looking out at London at night. He was thinking about nothing in particular. "Edmund," Sophia approached and hugged him from behind. "We agreed to be honest with each other." He sighed, covering her hands with his. "I was thinking about how I stole your choice," she said. "You could have married someone else, a young man who would have courted you properly, given you flowers and written you poems. Instead, you're stuck with me, Tremi, a cold, middle-aged man who bought you at auction." Sophia walked around him, forcing him to look at her. "First of all, you're 36. That's not middle-aged. Secondly, you're not cold, you're cautious. Those are different things. Thirdly," she touched his face, "I didn't have a choice then. That's true, but I choose you now, every day and every night. Not because I have to, but because I want to. But don't you ever regret it? Don't you dream of romance?" "Oh," Sophia kissed him, interrupting him. "This is romance. You buy me paints because you want me to be happy. You protect me from gossip. You hold me at night and tell me about your fears. That's real romance, Edmund. Not ostentatious, but deep." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I don't know how to say pretty words. I don't know how to act like the men in the novels you read when they're in love." Sophia laughed. "Thank God those heroes are unbearably perfect. 'Cause I need a real man with flaws, fears, and a past. I need you." They stood there, embracing, and Sophia felt the tension leave his body. "Do you know what I want?" she whispered. "I want us to leave London and go back to the estate. It's so quiet and peaceful there. We can just be ourselves without all these endless receptions and balls." Edmund stepped back and looked at her. "Are you sure? I thought you liked high society." "I did. When I was a girl, I used to dream of balls and dresses. But now, Sophie smiled. "Now I want something else. I want to wake up with you without rushing. I want to walk in the garden, paint and read. I want to get to know you better, away from prying eyes." Edmund kissed her on the forehead. "Then we'll leave tomorrow. To hell with all these receptions." They returned to the estate 2 days later. May was in full swing and the gardens were in bloom. The air was filled with the scent of roses and lilacs. Sophia felt something relax inside her as she returned home. Yes, home. Raywood Manor had become her home. Not the mansion on Berkeley Square where she had grown up, and not the room above the tannery where she had hidden from poverty, but here with Edmund. They had established a new rhythm of life. Breakfast together on the terrace overlooking the garden. Then Edmund would go to his study to sort out his affairs, and Sophia would go to her studio to paint. Around noon, they would meet for a walk or a ride. They would have lunch and discuss their plans for the day. Afterwards, Sophia would often visit families in the village and help out wherever she could. Edmund would sometimes go to the mines or factories to check on working conditions following the collapse. They spent their evenings together, sometimes reading aloud to each other, sometimes sitting quietly by the fireplace, and sometimes with Edmund playing the piano. Sophia was surprised to learn that he could play. She would listen to him, curled up in an armchair. The nights belonged to the two of them. Their bond grew deeper and more intimate. They learned to read each other and understand each other without words. Sophia was no longer ashamed of her body or her desires. Edmund was no longer afraid of vulnerability. One evening, a month after they had returned to the estate, Sophia sat in the garden under an old apple tree with a sketchbook. She was sketching flowers, trees, and birds. Edmund emerged from the house carrying 2 glasses of wine. "May I join you?" he asked. She patted the grass next to her. He sat down and handed her a glass. They sat in silence, watching the sun set and paint the sky pink and gold. "Sophie," Edmund said after a long pause, "I need to tell you something." There was something in his voice that made her wary. What was wrong? He looked at the sunset, avoiding her gaze. When I bought you at that auction, he continued, I thought I was making a practical choice, a convenient deal, a wife who would bear an heir and not demand the impossible. Sophia clutched her glass, bracing herself for the worst. But I was wrong, Edmund continued, finally turning to face her. I got an uncomfortable deal. I got a partner, a friend, and an advisor. A woman who sees right through me and stays anyway. A woman who makes me want to be a better person. Sophia felt tears welling up in her eyes. I want to say, Edmund took her hand, that if I could go back to that day in Madame Dupont's salon when I first saw you, I would do the same thing all over again. Not because it was convenient, but because even then, without knowing you, I felt something, a spark, a possibility. Sophia swallowed her tears. Let me finish, he asked. I'm not good at talking about feelings. But you deserve more than just actions. You deserve words too. You deserve to know that I wake up every morning grateful that you're here, that your smile is the best part of my day, and that when you touch me, I feel alive for the first time in 10 years. Tears flowed freely down Sophia's cheeks. I love you, Edmund said simply. Not because I have to, not out of habit. I love you in a way that I didn't think was possible again, completely and unconditionally, for the rest of my life. Sophia rushed to him, kissing him through her tears. They rolled onto the grass, laughing and crying at the same time, holding each other as if afraid to let go. I love you too, whispered Sophia when they finally stopped, lying in the grass and looking at the first stars. I love you so much that sometimes it scares me. What if something happens? What if I lose you? You won't lose me, said Edmund firmly. I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, Duchess of Raywood. Sophia laughed and wiped away her tears. The worst fate one could dream of. They lay in the grass until it was completely dark, embracing each other and whispering. They shared dreams of the future, of the children they would like to have, of the old age they would spend together, of how they would tell their grandchildren how they met. What will we tell them? Asked Sophia. That Grandpa bought Grandma at an auction. Edmund laughed. We'll say it was fate, strange and unconventional, but fate. Sometimes love doesn't come the way you expect, but that doesn't make it any less real. I like that version, agreed Sophia, snuggling up to him. A week later, Sophia realized that something had changed in her body. Morning sickness, dizziness, and unusual fatigue. She didn't tell Edmund, afraid of being wrong and disappointing him if it turned out to be just a minor illness. But when Dr. Fowler arrived at her request and confirmed her suspicions, Sophia could no longer keep it to herself. She found Edmund in the library, sorting through some reports. He looked up when she appeared and immediately noticed something in her face. What's wrong? You look strange. Sophia closed the door and leaned against it. Edmund, remember we talked about having children? He stood up, frowning. Yes. Why do you ask? Sophia put her hand on her stomach. Because it looks like we won't have to wait long. He just looked at her for a few seconds, not understanding. Then it dawned on him and his face changed. Are you pregnant? Sophia nodded, smiling through sudden tears. Yes, Dr. Fowler confirmed it today. The baby is due in January. Edmund crossed the room in 2 strides, picked her up, and spun her around. Sophia laughed and pressed herself against him. Careful, the doctor said, no sudden movements. He gently put her down but didn't let go, holding her so close that she could feel his heart beating. We're having a baby, he said. Yes, Sophia whispered. Our baby is the result of love, not duty. Edmund knelt in front of her and pressed his cheek against her flat stomach. Can you hear me, baby? I am your father, and I promise to love you with all my heart. I promise to protect you and to teach you to be kind, honest, and brave like your mother. Sophia ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with happiness. I promise to teach you to draw, to read, and to see the beauty in the world, even when it seems cruel. They sat like that for a long time. Edmund was kneeling in front of Sophia, hugging her and talking to the child who was not yet visible, but who was already so loved. You know what? It's strange, Sophia whispered. 6 months ago, I was standing at an auction, thinking my life was over. I thought I had lost everything, my family, my position, my future. Now she looked at Edmund's face, full of love and hope. Now I have more than I could have dreamed of. I have a husband who loves me, a home, and soon, a child. Edmund stood up and kissed her. I thought I was just buying a convenient solution to the problem of an heir, but I discovered the meaning of life. Quite a successful purchase, if you think about it, said Sophia, smiling. The best investment I've ever made, Edmund agreed. They stood embracing in the library, which was filled with evening light. They were husband and wife, two people who started with a cold deal and built something beautiful, love, family, and a future. The Duke who bought his heart without realizing it, and the woman who taught him to feel again. Their story was just beginning, and it promised to be a beautiful one. August brought with it the heat. Sophia sat in the shade on the terrace, fanning herself. Even though she was still 5 months away from giving birth, her belly was already a little rounded. Edmund had become unbearably attentive. He forbade her from climbing the stairs alone, insisted that Dr. Fowler visit her twice a week, and ordered the cook to prepare only the freshest and most nutritious meals. Sophia found this both touching and annoying. I'm pregnant, not ill, she said once again, when he tried to help her up from her chair. I know, Edmund replied, but did not remove his hand. Just let me take care of you. Sophia looked at his face and saw what he was trying to hide. Fear. Deep, all-consuming fear. Over the next few months, Edmund gradually learned to let go of his fear. He was still overly protective, but Sophia noticed how he began to smile when he felt the baby kick, and how he talked to her belly in the evenings, telling the baby what the world would be like when she arrived. Sophia continued to paint, now the nursery. They chose a sunny room on the second floor, next to their own bedrooms. Sophia painted a fairy tale forest complete with animals, flowers, and birds on the walls. Edmund helped, clumsily wielding a brush, and they laughed at his attempts to paint a squirrel that ended up looking like a crooked potato. Artistic talent is clearly not hereditary, she joked. But it will be passed on from my mother, Edmund replied, kissing her on the temple. In October, they received a letter from London. The Countess of Devonshire was hosting a Christmas ball and had invited them. We won't go, Edmund said immediately. You're 7 months pregnant. Traveling is dangerous. Sophia didn't argue. She didn't want to go anywhere herself. She felt huge and clumsy. Her back ached and her legs felt heavy. She found it uncomfortable to sleep in any position. But when she complained, Edmund would massage her feet, put pillows under her, and read aloud to distract her from her discomfort. I look like a whale, she sighed once, looking at her reflection. You look like a goddess, Edmund replied. A goddess of life, carrying our future. Sophia snorted. You have to say that. You're the reason I'm in this condition. But I'm proud of it, he said, smiling as he hugged her from behind. His hands rested on her stomach. At that moment, the baby kicked hard and Edmund gasped. He's kicking hard. She is, Sophia corrected him. I'm sure it's a girl. Too stubborn to be a boy. He insisted. Only a boy could be that strong. They argued about it constantly, jokingly turning the anticipation into a game. They celebrated Christmas quietly, just the two of them. As Sophia couldn't stand for long, they held the celebration in the library. They decorated a small Christmas tree there and then. The fireplace burned brightly, filling the air with the scent of cinnamon and mulled wine. Edmund gave Sophia an elegant necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. My heart, he said, fastening the clasp around her neck, which you bought without knowing it. Sophia gave him the portrait she had been painting for months. Edmund froze, staring at the canvas. This is how I see you, she said quietly. Not as a cold Herzog, but as a person, a husband, a father, a man I love. Edmund put down the portrait and pulled Sophia towards him, taking her rounded belly carefully into account. It was the best gift he had ever received. They sat by the fireplace, embracing. For the first time in many years, Sophie felt truly at home. Not just with Edmund, but with someone. January brought blizzards and cold weather. Sophie felt the baby dropping lower, preparing to be born. Dr. Fowler visited her every day now. Soon, he said, no more than a week. Edmund hardly left Sophia's side. He had moved all his work to the library so that he could be close to her. At night, he held her close. He rested his hand on her belly, feeling every movement of the baby. "I'm scared," Sophie admitted one night. "I know I told you not to be afraid, but now it's so close, I'm scared." "I'll be right here," Edmund whispered. "Everything will be fine, I promise." Labor began at dawn on 10 January. Edmund immediately sent for a doctor and a midwife. When they tried to send him out of the room, husbands did not usually attend births. He refused. He flatly refused to leave. "She is my wife," he said firmly. "I'm staying." The labor was long and difficult. Edmund did not leave Sophia's side for a minute, holding her hand and supporting her through the hardest moments. Finally, in the evening, the sound of a baby crying could be heard. "A girl," announced the midwife, lifting the tiny creature. "A healthy girl." Sophia cried with relief and happiness. Edmund couldn't hold back his tears either when the midwife placed the baby on Sophia's chest. There was a tiny, wrinkled, red face with a shock of dark hair. Sophia looked at her daughter and felt her heart overflow with love. "Our daughter," she whispered. "Ours," echoed Edmund, kissing her on the forehead and gently touching the baby's cheek with his finger. "Perfect." The girl opened her eyes, which were dark like her father's, and looked at them. "What shall we name her?" asked Edmund. "Eleanor," said Sophia, "in honor of your mother." Edmund froze, staring at her. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. She would be happy to know she has such a beautiful granddaughter." Tears rolled down Edmund's cheeks again. "Eleanor, Lady Eleanor Raywood." He kissed the tiny head. "Welcome to the world, my little girl." The following weeks were sweet and exhausting at the same time. Eleanor turned out to be a demanding child, waking up every 2 hours to demand food, attention, and comfort. Sophia was exhausted but happy. Edmund was unexpectedly good with the baby. He would rock her while Sophia rested, walk her around the room at night, and sing lullabies in his hoarse voice. "Who would have thought?" laughed Sophia as she watched the formidable Duke of Raywood change nappies. "You're better at this than most nannies." "She's my daughter," Edmund replied simply. "I want to get to know her and care for her. I won't leave it all to the servants." By March, they had established a routine. Eleanor slept for longer at night, smiled when she saw her parents, and cooed. Sophia drew her while she slept, holding her in her arms. Edmund read aloud to her. Poetry, philosophy, business reports, anything he could get his hands on. The girl seemed to be listening. Her dark eyes followed the movement of his lips intently. "She'll be clever," said Sophia. "Like her mother," Edmund agreed. One spring morning, while Eleanor slept in her cradle, they sat on the terrace, watching the garden come to life. Sophia leaned against Edmund. His arm was around her shoulders. "A year ago," she said quietly, "I stood at the auction, thinking my life was over. I thought I had lost everything and would never be happy again." "And Tanta," Edmund prompted. "And I was wrong." Sophia turned to him. "I didn't lose everything. I gained everything. You, our home, our daughter. I found love that I wasn't looking for." Edmund kissed her. "I thought I was buying a solution to a problem, a convenient deal, but I got a reason to live. A rather expensive reason to live," Sophia joked. 35,000 is priceless," Edmund corrected her. "If I had to, I would have paid 10 times as much." They sat in silence, listening to the birds singing and Eleanor's distant cries as she had woken up. Sophia stood up, but Edmund stopped her. "I'll go. You rest." She watched him go into the house, her heart overflowing. The man who had once seemed cold and unapproachable was now the most caring father and husband. Summer came, bringing warmth and blossom. Eleanor was growing quickly. She was already rolling over onto her front, grabbing toys and laughing heartily when her father tossed her into the air. In June, they received an invitation from the Countess of Devonshire, a summer picnic at her country estate. Sophia hesitated. Eleanor was only 5 months old, and the idea of taking her out into society was daunting. But Edmund insisted, "It's time to introduce our daughter to society. Let them see how beautiful she is." The picnic was an elegant affair. There were white tents on the lawn and tables laden with food. Musicians played light melodies. Sophia was nervous, holding Eleanor in her arms, but the guests were delighted. "How lovely!" exclaimed the Countess of Devonshire, "and so much like her father." Fortunately, she inherited her mother's beauty. replied Edmund. The guests laughed. Sophia noticed several ladies looking at them enviously. A year ago, she had been a scandal, the daughter of a suicide who had been bought at auction. Now, however, she was a happy duchess with a beautiful child and a loving husband. Life could really change. When they returned home in the evening, Eleanor fell asleep in the carriage. Edmund carefully carried her to the nursery and laid her in her crib. They stood over her, watching her sleep. Her tiny chest rose and fell. "Do you think we're good parents?" Sophie asked quietly. "I think we're trying," Edmund replied. "And that's enough." Sophie leaned against him. "Do you want more children?" He hugged her. "I do, if you do. A house full of children, laughter and life." He paused. "But only when you're ready. I won't rush you." "I'm ready," Sophia whispered. "Ready for a big family, for a long life together, and for old age when we'll sit on this terrace and watch our grandchildren playing." "Sounds like paradise," Edmund agreed. Years passed. Eleanor grew up to be a curious girl with a sharp mind and her mother's stubborn character. 2 years later, they had a son, whom they named Alexander. 3 years later came another daughter, Violet. The house was filled with life, noise, and joy. Edmund became the man he could always have been, warm, open, and loving. Sophia blossomed. Her talent as an artist was recognized in London, and her paintings were exhibited in galleries. However, the most precious thing for them both remained the quiet evenings when the children were asleep, when they would sit together by the fireplace. Sometimes they would sit in silence, sometimes they would discuss the day, and sometimes they would simply hold hands. 20 years after their wedding, when they were both over 50 and Eleanor was preparing for her own wedding, Sophia and Edmund sat on the terrace where they had once confessed their love for each other. "Do you regret it?" Edmund asked. "About how it all began," thought Sophia. "I regret that my father did what he did. I regret the pain I went through." But she didn't look at him for a second. "Even the fact that I bought you led me to you, to this life, to our children," Sophie smiled. Edmund pulled her close to him. "You know what I've realized over the years? That I didn't buy your heart at that auction. You gave it to me freely, without coercion, because you wanted to. And that's worth more than all the money in the world." Sophia kissed him long and tenderly, her love for him having grown stronger over the years. "I realize that sometimes life doesn't give us what we want, but what we need. I wanted freedom, but I got you instead. And it turned out that you are my freedom, the freedom to be myself, to love, and be loved." They sat there, embracing each other and watching the sunset. They were two people who started out as strangers in a cold transaction. They went through doubts, fears, and difficulties, and built a life full of love, laughter, and family. The Duke who bought his heart without realizing it, and the woman who sold her freedom and found it in love. Their story was not like a fairy tale. It was real with its difficulties, imperfections, and moments of doubt, but it was theirs, and it was beautiful. Somewhere in the house, children's laughter rang out. The grandchildren had come to visit. Sophia smiled. It was time to go. The children are waiting. "Just one more minute," Edmund asked, not letting her go. "Let's just stay here together." Sophia pressed herself against him, listening to the beating of his heart. The heart that she had won, not bought. Day after day, smile after smile, kiss after kiss. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Edmund replied. "Yesterday, today, tomorrow, always." And it was true. It was the simplest and most beautiful truth in their lives. Love.